Everyone knows you were a thot before you met me, Mike said, smiling like it was nothing. My throat closed on air. The blue LEDs from the TV cast a cold, swimming light over the gift table and the shiny black PS5 box I'd brought with my own savings. His apartment was packed. Music too loud, plastic cups sweating in people's hands, that sharp mix of cologne and cheap beer hanging in the warm air. I'd arrived 10 minutes earlier with the gift tucked under my arm like it weighed more than it did. I'd told myself it was worth it. 4 years together. His birthday. The way he'd repeated for weeks that the PS5 was the only thing he wanted. When I set it down, the room erupted the way you'd think it would. Men shouting like kids, someone whistling, 2 of Mike's friends clapping him on the back hard enough to shove him forward. Mike actually grabbed my face with both hands and kissed my cheek, quick and showy, like I was part of the presentation. Then Jessica, his best friend, the one who always seemed to be standing just a little too close, laughed and tossed her hair over one shoulder. I wish I was a thot so I could afford a PS5 too. The word landed on me like a wet slap. I stared at her, waiting for her to take it back, to blink and say she'd misspoken. Her smile tightened instead, like she enjoyed watching people figure out how to react. "Never mind," she said, already turning away, as if she'd dropped something on the floor and it wasn't her job to pick it up. I stood there with my hands empty, suddenly aware of how I'd dressed. Simple dark jeans, a soft sweater, my hair pinned back the way I do when I don't want to look like I'm trying too hard. My face felt hot, not from embarrassment at first, from disbelief. Mike didn't follow her. He didn't even look bothered. I moved toward him, careful, because I've learned over the years that men like Mike can make you feel dramatic with one raised eyebrow. I leaned in close enough that he could hear me over the music. "Why would she call me that?" He laughed, actually laughed, and tipped his cup back like I'd just delivered a punchline. "Babe, she's messing with you. You can't take a joke?" A joke. That word is a shield people use when they don't want to apologize. "I'm not asking if it's a joke," I said, keeping my voice low. I could feel eyes drifting toward us, that subtle curiosity people have when there's trouble, but not enough to interrupt their fun. "I'm asking why she thinks she can say it." Mike gave a small shrug, like my discomfort was a boring detail. "Because, everyone knows your past." My stomach tightened. My past? He leaned closer, his breath faintly sour and his tone turned casual, dangerously casual. "You know, the colorful part." That phrase, colorful, made something in me go still. It was the same past I'd told him about early on. The truth. Not a confession, not a sob story, just honesty. When I was 18, I dated a guy for a short time. Then I dated someone else a few months later, not knowing they were close friends. I didn't cheat. I didn't overlap. I didn't sneak around. I just didn't know. I'd taken my embarrassment and my lesson and moved on, and for years it was a private bruise I never touched. Mike had said it didn't bother him. He'd looked me in the eyes and told me it didn't change who I was. And now here he was, using it in a room full of people. "What do you mean, everyone knows?" I asked. He looked over my shoulder toward Jessica, then back at me. His mouth twitched like he was amused by my confusion. "Well, messing with best friends." My hands curled into fists at my sides. "That is not what happened." He patted my shoulder. An actual pat, like I was a child getting comforted for being upset about something silly. "It's okay. You're not who you were back then." My body went cold. He kept talking, confident now because he had an audience and he could feel my restraint. "Look, if I can get over your, colorful past and those thot mentalities, then you can get over Jessica's comment and give her another chance." It wasn't just what he said. It was the way he said it, like he was handing me mercy, like I owed him gratitude for tolerating me. For a second, I couldn't move. The music thumped. Someone yelled for another round. A burst of laughter rose from the kitchen. The room kept living while something inside me went quiet and sharp. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself with a speech. I didn't beg him to understand. I simply looked at him, really looked, and realized he'd been storing my past like a weapon he could pull out whenever he needed leverage. Jessica drifted back into view, watching us from behind her cup, her lips curved like she already knew how this would play out. Mike's friends were half listening now, the way people do when they sense drama and want to pretend they're above it while still enjoying it. I stepped away from Mike without a word. I walked straight to the gift table. The PS5 box sat there under the harsh overhead light, the bow slightly crooked from where someone had jostled it. My own name was still on the receipt folded in my purse because I'd paid for it myself, dipping into money I'd promised myself I wouldn't touch. I slid my hands around the box. It was heavier than I expected, not because of the console, but because of everything it represented in that moment. My effort, my willingness, my pride in being generous, my belief that love meant investing. The room shifted. Someone said, "Oh, she's taking it to him," as if this was still part of the celebration. Mike's smile faltered. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. I turned and walked out. Behind me, the music kept going for one extra beat before people noticed. Then came that ugly hush, the kind that turns a party into a courtroom without anyone admitting it. I heard Mike call my name once, sharp, like an order. I didn't look back. The hallway outside his apartment felt cooler, quieter, like stepping underwater. My hands were steady on the box. My heart wasn't. I rode the elevator down with a couple who avoided my eyes, pretending they weren't witnessing anything. When the doors opened, I walked into the night air and felt it hit my face like a slap of reality. My phone started buzzing before I reached my car. One call, then another, then another. I set the PS5 on the passenger seat like a passenger I no longer trusted. And as Mike's name flashed across my screen again, I realized I wasn't just leaving a party. I was leaving the version of myself that kept swallowing small humiliations to keep the peace. The phone didn't stop vibrating the entire drive home. I kept it face down in the cup holder, the screen lighting up my car in sharp blue flashes every few seconds, like a warning signal I refused to read. Mike's name came up again and again until it blurred into a single shape of noise. When I pulled into my driveway, my hands were aching from gripping the steering wheel too tightly. I sat there for a moment, the engine still running, listening to it idle. The quiet felt unnatural after the party, like my ears were still ringing from music that had already ended. Inside the house, I set the PS5 box on the kitchen table. The overhead light hummed faintly, too bright for the hour, flattening everything into harsh clarity. I stared at the box like it might say something to me if I waited long enough. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Mike. It was a group text I didn't even realize I'd been added to. Jessica. Wow, that was dramatic. Another message came through before I could even process the first. One of Mike's friends. You really embarrassed him tonight. I sank into a chair, the hard wood pressing into my back. My chest felt tight, not with panic, but with that old familiar feeling of being cornered without anyone laying a hand on you. I typed nothing. Mike called again. I let it ring. Then a text. Answer your phone. Another. What the hell is wrong with you? I finally picked it up, not to reply, just to see how bad it was. The notifications stacked on top of each other, accusations disguised as concern. You ruined my birthday. Everyone thinks you're unstable. You could have just laughed it off. I rested my elbows on the table and put my head in my hands. The PS5 box was still there between my forearms, the bow sliding loose like it had given up pretending. For a moment, just a moment, I wondered if I really had gone too far. That doubt crept in quietly, the way it always does, asking questions that sound reasonable until you realize they're meant to make you smaller. Then my phone rang again. This time I answered. What? I said. Mike didn't waste time. He didn't ask if I'd gotten home safe. He didn't lower his voice. Are you kidding me? He shouted. I could hear people talking in the background, laughter breaking through his anger. He was still at the party. You let your friend call me names, I said. My voice sounded older than I felt, steady in a way that surprised even me. "Oh my God," he scoffed. "You're still on that?" "Yes," I said. One word. Clean. Sharp. There was a pause. Not silence, just him deciding which version of himself to use. "You didn't have to make a scene," he said finally. "Everyone saw you grab the gift like that. You humiliated me." I looked at the box on the table. The corners were perfectly intact. Nothing about it looked damaged. "I didn't raise my voice," I said. "I didn't call you names. I left." "You took my present," he snapped. "That's messed up." "Something you didn't earn isn't yours," I said before I could stop myself. He went quiet for half a second. Then his tone shifted, smoother, heavier. "You're overreacting because you're sensitive about your past." There it was again. That word, past, like it was a stain that never washed out. "I was honest with you," I said. "And I accepted you," he replied, as if reading from a script he'd practiced. "Most guys wouldn't." I felt something settle in my chest then, like a door closing. "Mike," I said, "if you think you did me a favor by dating me, then we're done." A laugh burst out of him, short and cruel. "You're seriously going to throw away 4 years over a joke?" I didn't answer. "Return the PS5, he said, suddenly sharp again. "Bring it back. Now." I looked down at my hands. They were steady. That scared me more than the shouting. "I already left," I said. "Bring it back tomorrow," he insisted. "You owe me." I ended the call. The store was still open. That fact arrived in my mind fully formed, undeniable. I picked up the box, tucked it under my arm, and walked back out to my car. The drive to the store felt surreal. The parking lot lights glared down like interrogation lamps. Inside, everything smelled like plastic and newness. The clerk didn't ask why I was returning it. He didn't look at me with judgment. He scanned the receipt, nodded, and processed the refund like this was just another transaction. When he handed my card back, relief washed over me so suddenly I had to blink hard. Back in my car, my phone exploded again. Missed calls, messages, voice notes I didn't open. Jessica sent another text. "So you're really doing this? After everything Mike's done for you?" I stared at the words. Everything he's done for you. As if tolerance was a gift. Another message followed, this one from someone I barely knew. "You can't punish him for your mistakes." That one landed differently. It sat in my stomach like a weight. When I got home again, the house felt too big, too quiet. I set my phone on the counter and finally opened one of Mike's voice messages. His voice was hoarse now, angry but wounded in a way that felt rehearsed. "You're the biggest asshole I've ever met," he said. "You should be grateful I looked past your colorful past." I didn't cry. That surprised me too. I typed back one message, slow and deliberate. "You deserve better than me. Find someone without a past you're ashamed of and have her buy you a PS5. I hit send. The typing bubbles appeared immediately, then vanished, then appeared again. I set the phone down and turned off the light, leaving the kitchen in shadow, knowing whatever came next wouldn't stay contained to messages much longer. I was 48 years old when all of that happened, even though the girl they were talking about, the one they called careless, the one they reduced to a word, was 18 in their mouths. Time does that. It folds years together until people forget how much living happens in between. I didn't always understand my past as something that could be used against me. For a long time, it was just memory. Uneven, sometimes uncomfortable, but mine. It wasn't until that night, sitting alone in my dark kitchen with my phone face down on the counter, that I felt how easily other people can turn your history into currency. I grew up learning early that money decided how safe you were. My mother kept envelopes in a chipped ceramic bowl on top of the fridge. Rent, electric, groceries, cash folded flat, edges worn soft from being counted and recounted. When one envelope ran light, something else went dark. A lamp, a phone line, sometimes the heat. I learned numbers before I learned comfort. At 16, I took my first real job at a grocery store, standing on tired feet and smiling until my jaw ached. I liked the feeling of my first paycheck in my hands, thin paper but heavy with possibility. I didn't spend it. I slid it into my mother's bowl without being asked. She never said thank you. She just nodded, like we both understood this was how things worked now. I left home at 18 with 2 duffel bags and the kind of optimism that only exists when you don't know yet how expensive mistakes can be. Jake came into my life that year the way so many people do now, through a screen. He was charming in messages, thoughtful in a way that felt deliberate. He listened. He asked questions. When you're young and newly alone, that kind of attention feels like proof that you're doing adulthood right. We met in person a handful of times, coffee, walks, awkward kisses that tasted like nerves. It lasted 3 months. No fireworks, no disaster, just the quiet realization that wanting someone isn't the same as being ready for them. I ended it cleanly. He didn't argue. We wished each other well. Adam came later, through work. He stocked shelves overnight, cracked jokes that cut through exhaustion, shared cigarettes in the alley during breaks. It felt grounded, familiar. We dated briefly too. When I found out, by accident, through a careless comment, that Adam and Jake were close friends, my stomach dropped so hard it felt like falling through a floor that had always been there. I remember standing in that stock room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, my hands shaking around a clipboard. I hadn't lied. I hadn't overlapped. I hadn't betrayed anyone. But it didn't matter. What mattered was how it looked. I stepped back from dating after that, not out of shame exactly, but out of caution. I didn't trust myself to see the full picture yet. I worked more hours, saved more money. I rented smaller rooms, ate the same meals for weeks at a time. I built a life that didn't depend on anyone else staying kind. 2 years later, I met Mike. He was older than me by a few years, already established in a way that felt comforting. He talked about plans instead of dreams, stability instead of potential. When I told him about my past, because I always told the truth early, he listened with his head tilted, brows drawn together like he was considering something complex. "That doesn't bother me," he said. "Everyone has a past." I believed him. For years, he never brought it up. Not once. We built routines, shared rent, bought furniture piece by piece, learned each other's habits, the way he liked his coffee strong, the way I paid bills the day they arrived so I wouldn't forget. We weren't dramatic. We were steady. I worked my way into better jobs, office work, admin, eventually a role that came with benefits and a modest savings account. I was proud of that account. It represented discipline. Survival turned into something more than just scraping by. That savings was what I dipped into for the PS5, not recklessly, intentionally. I'd watched Mike talk about it for months, eyes lighting up in a way I didn't see often anymore. I told myself generosity was part of love, that investing in joy mattered too. What I didn't see, what I hadn't learned yet, was how quietly some people keep score. There were signs looking back, small ones. The way he'd joke about my wild years whenever someone else mentioned dating mishaps. The way he'd smile just a little when I'd correct him. The way Jessica fit into his life like an assumption no one questioned. She'd been there since before me. She knew stories I didn't. She moved through his space with ownership, opening drawers, using nicknames that belonged to another time. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself security meant not needing to compete. That night cracked something open I couldn't reseal. Sitting alone after returning the PS5, I thought about that ceramic bowl from my childhood, about the envelopes, about how carefully I'd learned to measure worth through responsibility. I realized Mike had been doing something similar, only with people. I slept poorly. When I woke, my phone was still buzzing. Messages from numbers I didn't recognize. People weighing in on a story they'd only heard one side of. "You should apologize." He was just being honest. "You can't change how people see you." Each message felt like a finger pressing into an old bruise, testing whether it still hurt. I went to work on autopilot, answering emails, filing reports, nodding through meetings. My body was present. My mind kept circling the same realization. I had told the truth years ago, and it had waited patiently for the right moment to be used against me. That scared me more than the insult itself. By the end of the day, I understood something with quiet clarity. My past hadn't changed, but the way it was being held had. And once someone decides your history belongs to them, they will never stop reaching for it when they need to feel powerful. The days that followed didn't explode. They thinned. Mike didn't apologize. He didn't ask to talk things through. Instead, he adjusted his behavior just enough to make me doubt my own reactions. He texted like nothing had happened, short, logistical messages about shared bills, about picking up something from the apartment, about whether I'd moved the router. When I didn't answer quickly, he'd wait. Hours, sometimes a full day. Then he'd send something light, almost playful, like he was giving me a chance to come back without forcing him to acknowledge what he'd done. Silence became his favorite tool. When I finally went back to the apartment to collect a few things, he wasn't there. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. The space felt altered, like someone had rearranged the furniture in a dream. My shoes by the door were gone, not thrown out, just missing. The coat I kept on the hook was folded neatly on the couch, as if it no longer belonged in shared space. I stood there, keys still in my hand, and waited for my breathing to settle. It didn't. On the coffee table, my mail sat stacked in a tidy pile, opened. Not everything, just the pieces that showed numbers, bank statements, insurance letters. I picked one up, my name printed clearly across the top, and felt a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with anger. Mike had never asked permission. My phone buzzed while I was still standing there. "Jessica's coming by," his message read. "Don't make it awkward." The sentence landed and stayed. Not a request, a warning. I moved through the apartment quickly after that, grabbing clothes, toiletries, the framed photo of my mother I kept on the dresser. I left the bigger things, the couch, the bookshelf we'd assembled together, the lamp I'd paid for but never loved. Each object felt heavier than it should have, like it was resisting being claimed. When Jessica arrived, she didn't knock. She let herself in, keys jingling, confidence intact. She smiled when she saw me, slow and deliberate. "Oh, you're here." Her eyes moved over the half-packed bag at my feet. She took in the scene with interest, like she was cataloging damage. "I'm just grabbing my things," I said. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You know Mike's really upset." I didn't respond. She waited. When I didn't fill the silence, she tilted her head. "He did a lot for you. You know that, right?" The room felt colder, even though the heat was on. I could hear it humming faintly through the vents. "I paid half the rent," I said. "I bought groceries. I returned the gift I paid for." Her smile thinned. "I'm not talking about money." That pause, right there, was deliberate. She let it stretch until I felt exposed inside it. "I'm talking about giving you a chance." Something in my chest tightened. Not a full collapse, just a narrowing. "I didn't ask for one," I said. She shrugged, like that detail didn't matter. "You can't expect people not to notice patterns." "What patterns?" My voice came out flatter than I intended. She looked at me then, really looked, and for a brief second, the friendliness dropped. "You tell me." I turned away, zipped my bag, and lifted it onto my shoulder. My hand trembled as I reached for the strap. I hated that she saw it. When I left, she didn't follow. She didn't need to. Her presence lingered in the apartment like a scent that wouldn't fade. At work, things shifted too. Mike and I shared a few mutual friends who worked in the same building. I noticed how conversations stopped when I approached, how invitations dried up without explanation. A lunch I'd been part of for months suddenly didn't include my name. One afternoon, a coworker I'd always gotten along with leaned toward me in the break room and lowered her voice. "Are you okay?" I nodded. The coffee machine hissed loudly between us. She hesitated. I heard, that things got messy. Messy how? I asked. She flushed. I don't know. Just history stuff. The phrase echoed. History stuff. Like my life could be reduced to a vague cautionary tale passed around to justify discomfort. That evening, Mike finally asked to talk. We met in a neutral place, a quiet cafe near the office. Warm light, soft music, the illusion of safety. He arrived late and sat down without apologizing, setting his phone face down on the table like he didn't plan to use it. "You really embarrassed me," he said, skipping any greeting. I watched his hands as he spoke. They were steady, relaxed. He felt in control. "I left," I said. "You took the gift," he corrected, "in front of everyone." I stared at the wood grain on the table. "You called me names." He waved that off. "No, Jessica did. And you agreed with her." Silence followed, not empty, waited. He leaned back. "You're twisting this." My throat tightened. "You said everyone knows." He sighed like I was exhausting him. "You're making it bigger than it needs to be." That sentence slid under my skin. I'd heard versions of it before, from bosses, from family, from men who benefited when I stayed quiet. "I want an apology," I said. He laughed, not loudly but with disbelief. "For what?" "For using my past against me." Another pause. Longer this time. He looked around the cafe, noticing other people, recalibrating. "I didn't use anything," he said. "I just told the truth." The words sat there, heavy and immovable. "I need space," I said. He leaned forward then, voice dropping. "You don't get to punish me because you're ashamed of who you were." That did it. Something inside me buckled. Not loudly, not all at once. Just enough that I had to grip the edge of the table to stay upright. My vision narrowed. For a moment, I couldn't hear the music anymore. I stood without saying anything else. He didn't stop me. The following weeks were a slow erosion. Mike stopped answering messages altogether, then resumed with clipped, transactional notes. He told mutual friends I was unstable, that I'd overreacted, that I had issues I refused to deal with. One night, I received a message from an unknown number. "You should stop playing the victim." I stared at it, heart pounding. Another message followed. "People don't forget who you really are." I blocked the number. Another appeared the next day, then another. The words changed, but the intent didn't. Each one was a reminder that my story no longer belonged only to me. At the lowest point, it wasn't the insults that hurt most. It was the way people stopped asking, stopped checking in, stopped seeing me as someone worth defending. One evening, sitting alone on the edge of my bed, I felt a brief, dangerous urge to apologize. To Mike, to Jessica, to anyone who would let me crawl back into something familiar. My hands shook in my lap. The room felt too quiet, too bare. Then my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Mike. "You could fix this if you wanted to." I stared at the screen, breath shallow, knowing whatever came next would decide whether I disappeared quietly or finally pushed back. The message sat on my screen longer than it should have. "You could fix this if you wanted to." I read it once, then again. The words didn't shout. They didn't threaten. That was what made them dangerous. They carried the quiet assumption that I was the problem and that resolution meant my submission. I didn't reply. I set my phone down on the nightstand and stood up, pacing the length of the bedroom. The floor was cold under my feet. I hadn't turned the heat up since moving into this temporary place, an old habit from years of watching utility bills too closely. The room smelled faintly of detergent and cardboard, the scent of a life still half-packed. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. For days, I'd been absorbing everything. Texts, silences, sideways looks at work, the way my name felt heavier in rooms where it used to be neutral. I kept telling myself it would pass if I stayed still enough. that if I didn't provoke anything, the noise would die down. But that message cracked something open, not in a dramatic way, not with anger rushing in all at once. It was more like clarity seeping through a hairline fracture. Fix this. I thought of the gift I'd returned, the savings I'd built dollar by dollar, the truth I'd told years ago, calmly, without embellishment. I thought of how easily it had been reshaped into a flaw that required forgiveness. I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed my palms into my knees, grounding myself in the weight of my body. My breathing came shallow at first, then steadied. I wasn't being punished for what I'd done. I was being punished for refusing to accept the version of myself they needed me to be. That realization landed fully formed, solid and unmistakable. It didn't bring relief. It brought resolve. The next morning, I didn't go to work right away. Instead, I opened my laptop at the small kitchen table and logged into my bank account. The familiar numbers stared back at me, orderly and precise. I clicked through recent transactions. The PS5 purchase, the refund, rent payments, shared expenses from the years Mike and I lived together. I wasn't looking for ammunition. Not yet. I was looking for the truth, exactly as it was. I opened old folders next, emails, shared documents, message threads I hadn't revisited in years, lease agreements, utility bills in my name, screenshots of conversations I'd saved without knowing why, the way you sometimes keep things because something in you senses they might matter later. Halfway through, my phone rang, a number I recognized but hadn't seen in months. I hesitated, then answered. "Hey," said Laura. Her voice was cautious. She worked in accounting at my office, someone I'd always been friendly with, but never close enough to share personal messes. "I heard things got rough," she continued. "With Mike." "Yes," I said. One word again. I was getting good at that. She exhaled. "I wanted to check in. There's something you should know." I closed my laptop slowly. "Okay." She lowered her voice even though we weren't in the same room. "He's been talking, not just to friends, to HR." My stomach dropped. "About what?" I asked. "About you," she said. "Nothing formal yet, just concerns, emotional stability, professional boundaries." The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. "I haven't done anything," I said. "I know," she replied quickly. "That's why I'm calling, but he's framing it like your personal issues are spilling into work." My fingers curled against the edge of the table. "When?" "Yesterday," she said. "After you left early." A silence followed. This one was thick, pressing in on my ears. "I didn't want you blindsided," Laura added. "I don't think this is over." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time without moving. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space. A car passed outside, tires hissing on pavement. This was no longer about a breakup, or a party, or an insult dressed up as humor. He was trying to rewrite me. I stood up and walked to the window, resting my forehead briefly against the cool glass. Outside, the morning light was pale and undecided, like it hadn't committed to warmth yet. I thought about all the times I'd stayed quiet to keep things from escalating, all the times I'd told myself dignity meant endurance. That belief loosened its grip. I went back to the table and reopened my laptop. This time, I created a new folder. I named it simply, No Emotion, No Commentary. I began saving things deliberately, dates, receipts, messages. I copied everything into one place, methodical and calm. My hands were steady now, my breathing even. Halfway through, another message came in from Mike. "You're really going to let this spiral?" I didn't answer. For the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting to him. I was moving independently of his rhythm, his timing, his need to stay in control. I closed the laptop and reached for a notebook from my bag, the plain one I used for work notes, margins filled with reminders and half-finished lists. I turned to a clean page and wrote down everything I could remember, in order, without judgment. Names, dates, exact words. When I finished, I leaned back in my chair and looked at what I'd done. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger, it was preparation. And as my phone buzzed again on the table, lighting up with his name, I knew with unsettling certainty that the next time we spoke, I wouldn't be asking for understanding anymore. Preparation doesn't feel brave when you're in it. It feels quiet, small, almost boring if you let yourself believe that danger only announces itself loudly. I worked in the early mornings and late nights when my thoughts were clearest and my phone was less likely to interrupt. I brewed coffee and let it go cold beside me, the way I used to during tight months when every minute mattered. The habit returned easily. Focus has muscle memory. I started with facts. I printed bank statements from the last 4 years, spreading them across the table in neat rows. Rent transfers, utilities, grocery payments. The refund receipt from the console return sat there too, its ink sharp and undeniable. I highlighted nothing yet. I wanted to see the whole picture before I decided what mattered. Then I moved to messages. Not just the obvious ones, not just the cruel lines that burned on rereading. I saved threads where tone shifted, where warmth thinned into impatience, where humor edged into correction, messages where I'd apologized without being accused, where I'd softened my language while his sharpened. I didn't analyze them yet. I let them exist. Every so often my phone buzzed with a new number, a new message. Some were openly hostile. Some tried to sound reasonable. You're blowing this out of proportion. He's just worried about you. Why can't you let it go? I didn't respond. I logged dates and times in the notebook instead. I wrote down exactly what was said, then closed the book and returned to my work. Each entry felt like laying a brick, not heavy on its own, but solid together. At the office, I kept my head down. I arrived early, left on time, spoke only when necessary. I noticed who avoided my eyes and who didn't. Laura stopped by my desk one afternoon under the pretense of returning a stapler. She leaned in slightly, voice low. "He asked HR again," she said. "When?" I asked. "This morning." My fingers tightened around my pen. "About what?" "She said he's concerned you're unstable after the breakup," Laura replied. "That he's worried you might escalate." I swallowed. "Escalate how?" Laura shook her head. "He didn't say. That's the point." I nodded once. I didn't let my face change. "Thank you for telling me." After she left, I sat very still. The hum of the office felt louder than usual, lights buzzing faintly overhead. I waited for panic to arrive. It didn't. Instead, I opened a blank document and typed a timeline. Nothing dramatic, just dates and events laid out cleanly. The party, the insult, the return, the messages, the silence, the new accusations, the workplace interference. I didn't include feelings, I included facts. That night, I met with an old friend for coffee. Not someone close to Mike, not someone involved, someone I trusted because she'd always asked questions before forming opinions. She listened without interrupting, hands wrapped around her mug, eyes steady. "He's setting a narrative," she said when I finished. "I know," I replied. "You need to protect yourself," she continued, "not emotionally, structurally." I nodded. "I'm working on it." She hesitated. "Do you have copies of everything?" "Yes." "Backups?" I paused. "Not yet." "Do that," she said gently, "and talk to someone who understands process, not just feelings." On the walk home, her words echoed. Structurally, process, the language of systems, of rules that don't bend for charm. I spent the weekend creating backups, cloud storage, an external drive. I labeled folders with dates and neutral titles, nothing that could be dismissed as emotional framing. I also reached out to HR myself. I didn't accuse, I didn't speculate. I requested a meeting to clarify expectations and address potential misinformation related to my professional conduct. The response came faster than I expected. "Of course," the email read. "Let's talk." Mike didn't contact me that day, or the next. The silence felt strategic now, not accidental. Midweek, I received an email from a mutual friend. someone I hadn't heard from since the night of the party. "I don't want to get involved," it began, "but I think you should know Mike's been saying you're threatening him." My breath caught, just once, then steadied. "Threatening how?" I typed back. The reply came an hour later. "He says you're collecting things to ruin his reputation." I stared at the screen. The irony sat there, unblinking. That night, I opened my notebook again and added a new section. Not evidence. Not yet. Witnesses. I wrote down names. Who was at the party? Who heard what? Who saw me leave without shouting? Who saw the gift taken quietly from the table? I didn't reach out to them. I didn't ask for statements. I just mapped the room as it had been, like reconstructing an accident scene from memory. As I worked, I noticed something else. A small detail I'd ignored before. The timing of Jessica's comments. Not random, not spontaneous. She'd waited until the gift was public, until attention was high, until the moment couldn't be undone quietly. I wrote her name down too. At work, HR scheduled our meeting for the following week. The calendar invite sat there, neutral and polite, offering an hour of fluorescent-lit conversation that could tilt things one way or another. I prepared for that too. I practiced answers aloud in my empty kitchen, not speeches, just clear responses. "No, that isn't accurate. Here's what happened," each sentence short, measured, unapologetic. The night before the meeting, my phone buzzed again. "Mike," a text this time. "We need to talk. This is getting out of hand." I read it twice. Then another message followed. "I don't want to do this publicly." My pulse ticked faster, but my hands stayed steady. I typed one line. "Please put everything you need to say in writing." The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. He didn't respond. Instead, 10 minutes later, an email arrived in my inbox. The subject line was vague, the tone almost polite. He wrote about misunderstandings, about how hurt he'd been, about concern, about my reaction being disproportionate. And then, buried halfway down, a sentence that made my shoulders go cold. "I've been advised to protect myself if this continues." I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Not for long, just long enough to register the shift. This wasn't about mending anything. This was about positioning. I saved the email. I backed it up. And as I shut down my laptop for the night, I understood with absolute clarity that the next step wouldn't be quiet anymore, because he had just admitted, without realizing it, that he was afraid of what I had already gathered. The conference room smelled like stale coffee and printer toner. I arrived 10 minutes early and chose the chair closest to the door, not out of fear, but because I wanted a clear line of exit if I needed it. The table was long and pale, scarred with faint scratches from years of nervous hands and sliding folders. Overhead, the lights were unforgiving, bright white, flattening every face into honesty whether it wanted to be there or not. I placed my folder on the table and rested my palms on top of it, feeling the familiar weight through the cardboard. My breathing was steady. I had practiced that. The door opened. Mike walked in first. He stopped when he saw me already seated, his expression flickering just long enough to register surprise before he smoothed it away. He wore a jacket I'd never seen before, new, stiff, like armor. He didn't sit near me. He chose the opposite side of the table and crossed his arms, leaning back as if he were bored by the whole thing. Jessica followed him in. That part surprised me. She didn't sit. She hovered near the wall, phone in hand, posture casual but eyes sharp, scanning the room like she was measuring angles. She smiled when she caught my gaze. It didn't reach her eyes. Then HR arrived, 2 women, both calm, both carrying laptops and neutral expressions polished by training. They greeted us evenly, as if we were all on equal footing. "We're here to clarify concerns that have been raised," one of them said, settling into her seat, "and to ensure a professional environment moving forward." Mike nodded immediately. "That's all I want." His voice was measured, reasonable, The same voice he used when explaining things to people who didn't yet realize they were being corrected. One of the HR reps turned to him. "You initiated these concerns. Would you like to explain them?" Mike leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands loosely clasped. "I'm worried about her," he said, gesturing toward me without looking. "She's been unstable since the breakup, emotional, fixated." I didn't react. He continued. "She returned a gift in a very public way. She's been collecting messages, reaching out to people, making this bigger than it needs to be. I just want to make sure this doesn't turn into something damaging." The room felt very still. The HR rep nodded slowly. "What kind of damage are you concerned about?" Mike hesitated just a fraction too long. "Reputation, work environment, safety." Safety. That word landed like a dropped glass. I felt my jaw tighten. I let it. The other HR rep turned to me. "Would you like to respond?" "Yes," I said. One word. Calm. I opened my folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the table, not toward Mike, but toward HR. "This is a timeline," I said. "Dates, verifiable events, no opinions." They glanced down. One of them raised her eyebrows slightly. "I was insulted publicly at a personal event," I continued. "When I asked for clarification, my past was used against me. I left quietly. I returned an item I purchased with my own money. After that, I received repeated messages, both direct and indirect, framing me as unstable." Mike scoffed softly, not loud enough to interrupt, loud enough to signal disbelief. I kept going. "I did not contact HR. He did. I did not threaten him. I requested that further communication be in writing." I slid another document forward. "This is the email he sent me after I asked for written communication." The HR rep scanned it. Her finger stopped midway down the page. "I've been advised to protect myself," she read aloud. Silence followed. "Not the empty kind, the kind that presses in on your ears." Mike shifted in his chair. "That's out of context." "Is it?" the HR rep asked, eyes still on the page. Jessica cleared her throat from the wall. "I can explain." "We didn't ask you to speak," the second HR rep said gently without looking at her. Jessica's smile faltered. I reached into my folder again, slower this time, and placed another sheet on the table. "These are screenshots from the night of the party," I said. "Group messages sent to me after I left, including commentary on my character." The HR rep's mouth tightened as she read. Mike leaned back again, crossing his arms. "Those are private messages. You can't—" "They were sent to me," I said, unprompted. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room felt colder, the lights harsher. The HR rep looked up. "Were these messages sent by employees of this company?" "Yes," I said, "including him." Mike's jaw clenched. "And her," I added, glancing briefly toward Jessica. That was the moment the room froze. Jessica laughed, sharp and defensive. "I was joking. Everyone jokes." The HR rep finally looked at her. "Please take a seat." Jessica hesitated, then sat stiffly at the far end of the table, legs crossed, phone clenched in her hand. Mike spoke again, faster now. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. She's collecting things, building a case." I met his eyes for the first time since he walked in. "I didn't build anything," I said. "You sent it to me." The words hung there. The HR reps exchanged a look. "Mike," one of them said, "you described concern about escalation, but what we're seeing is documentation of repeated contact and character-based commentary after a relationship ended." He opened his mouth, then closed it. "I was trying to de-escalate," he said finally. "By contacting HR without informing her?" the rep asked. He didn't answer. The second HR rep turned to me. "Have you contacted him since requesting written communication?" "No." "Have you contacted coworkers to discuss this situation?" "No." "Have you made any threats?" "No." She nodded slowly, typing notes. Then she looked at Jessica. "Did you make the comment at the party that referenced her past?" Jessica shifted. I don't remember exactly what I said. Mike leaned toward her. Jess. She cut him a glance. I was drunk. It was a joke. The HR rep tilted her head. A joke about sexual history? Jessica's face flushed. I didn't mean it like that. What way did you mean it? The rep asked. Jessica opened her mouth. Nothing came out. The silence stretched. This one was unbearable. Mike exhaled sharply. This is ridiculous. You're blowing one comment out of proportion. I didn't look at him. I looked at the table, at the faint scratches, at the reflection of the overhead light in the polished surface. 4 years ago, I said. I told him the truth about my past. He said it didn't matter. I lifted my gaze back to the room. It mattered when it benefited him. No one interrupted me. He used it publicly. He allowed someone else to use it. Then he reframed my reaction as instability. The HR rep closed her laptop slowly. We're going to pause here, she said. Based on what's been presented, we need to address inappropriate conduct, misuse of workplace channels, and harassment. Mike sat very still. Jessica's foot bounced under the table. We'll be following up individually, the rep continued. Effective immediately, there will be no further contact between you outside of work-necessary communication, and that will be monitored. Mike's voice came out tight. So that's it? You're taking her side? The HR rep looked at him evenly. We're following the evidence. The words settled into the room like a final stamp. As the meeting ended, chairs scraped softly against the floor. Papers were gathered. The door opened. Mike stood, face pale now. Composure cracked. You didn't have to do this, he said quietly, anger bleeding through. You could have just fixed it. I picked up my folder and met his eyes. I did, I said. He stared at me, searching for something. Remorse, maybe, or collapse. He found neither. As I walked out of the room, the hallway light felt different. Still harsh, but no longer accusing, and behind me I heard Jessica whisper his name, sharp with panic, while he said nothing at all. The quiet after everything settled felt unfamiliar, like stepping into a room where the furniture had been moved and realizing you could finally breathe. HR followed through the way systems do when they can no longer pretend not to see. Mike was removed from projects that overlapped with mine. Communication went through supervisors only, clipped and monitored. Jessica stopped coming to the office altogether after a few weeks. I heard later she'd transferred to another department across town. No one announced it. Her name just faded out of conversations the way some presences do when they were never meant to last. At first, I waited for the fallout to hurt more than it did. I expected whispers, side glances, that familiar tightening in the chest when you walk into a room knowing people have decided something about you. Instead, what I noticed was absence. The people who had believed the story without question simply stopped approaching me. The ones who stayed offered something quieter, normalcy. A nod in the hallway, a comment about the weather, a meeting that stayed on topic. I learned something then about peace. It doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives without resistance. At home, I unpacked slowly. Not because I was sad, but because I wanted to feel each object return to its place. I bought a small table for the kitchen and set it near the window. In the mornings, light filtered in gently, no longer interrogating, just present. I brewed coffee and let it sit while I stared out at the street, watching people pass with their own invisible burdens. Mike didn't contact me again. Once, months later, I saw him across a parking lot outside a grocery store. He looked thinner, less certain. He noticed me at the same time I noticed him. His shoulders stiffened, like he was bracing for impact. I nodded once. He looked away first. There was no triumph in that moment, only confirmation. I didn't need to be louder. I didn't need to explain myself again. The truth had already done what it needed to do, quietly and completely. Sometimes, late at night, old doubts still try to knock. They ask if I should have handled things differently, If leaving without arguing was weakness, if gathering documents instead of shouting was cold, then I remember the meeting, the pause when the room shifted, the way his confidence drained when faced with his own words. I remember that strength doesn't always raise its voice. Life moved on in small, practical ways. I opened a separate savings account just for myself, transferring money with a steadiness that felt ceremonial. I bought a new notebook, not for evidence this time, but for plans, travel ideas, classes I might take, things I'd postponed because they didn't fit into someone else's timeline. The past didn't disappear. It softened. I stopped thinking of it as something that needed defending. It was simply a record of survival, imperfect and honest, like most lives are when you tell them without decoration. One afternoon, while cleaning, I found a ceramic bowl at the back of a cabinet. I hadn't realized I'd packed it when I moved. The same chipped one my mother used to keep envelopes in, rent, electric, groceries. I ran my thumb along the crack in its side and smiled despite myself. I set it on the kitchen table. This time, I placed different things inside. A receipt from my first solo weekend trip, a folded note with a reminder to renew my passport, a small card with my name written cleanly across it, no qualifiers attached. The bowl no longer held fear, it held intention. If you stayed with me until now, thank you. That old ceramic bowl once reminded me how close survival could get to loss, but today it reminds me that what we carry forward matters more than what we were once forced to endure. If any part of my story felt familiar, you don't have to explain it. Sometimes recognition is enough, and sometimes it's the beginning of choosing yourself.